Welcome to Nurse to Health special episode. I'll tell you why in a second, but this is, as always, a collaboration with Hofstra Northwell School of Nursing and Physician Assistant Studies, broadcasting from the wonderful studios of WRHU on the wonderful Hofstra campus. As always, supported by the best in the business, John Mullen, who is recording this. This is a very special episode because the two guests I have are, all our guests are special, but these two are very near and dear to me. My cousin, David Meyer, and his wonderful wife, Galina Hale. I quite literally grabbed them, insisted they come here on their way to catch a plane in about an hour or so this sounds somewhat rushed. Maybe it's because it is. I wish we had literally 2 hours, 3-4 hours to do this because the topic is incredibly important, and these two wonderful guests know an incredible amount about it. Just a couple of things before we get started. I mentioned we're going to be talking about food and drink, anything that you put inside your mouth to keep you going. That's what we're going to be talking about. A couple of things. First of all, I'm going to dedicate this episode to my brother who passed away a couple of years ago because one of his main efforts in life over the last years that he was around was trying to enhance food for us all by way of various condiments. He was working on something called chili crisp, so big shout out to him with loving memory. I also want to just a bit of a disclaimer on this. We're going to be talking about diets and nutrition. As always, if you're seeking medical advice or nutritional or diet advice, don't take it from a podcast. We want to throw out some ideas for you to be thinking about for sure. Do your own research. I hope this podcast encourages you to do that. And as with any sort of health-related advice, always check with a trusted professional. So with that, we're going to get going. I'm going to introduce my two wonderful guests here. Oh, and just to mention as well, my co-host, Karim Nagdala, is away for this episode, but he will be back. So just with that, let me introduce first David Meyer. Hello, David.
Hello, Robert.
And his wonderful wife, Galina Hale. So I'll let you sort of frame this. Why do you think I have you here? What do you bring to this subject, David?
Well, so I co-founded, along with Galina, Dr. Hale, Food System Innovations, which is a nonprofit organization that works to help create a sustainable global food system, a humane and sustainable global food system. I came to this largely through animal welfare. I became concerned about the treatment of animals in the food system. And as it turns out, the ways in which we're producing animals today on what are called factory farms, the way most meat, eggs, dairy are produced is very bad for animals, but it's also very bad for people in a lot of different ways. And one of those ways is its effect on the climate. And that's what brought us to New York here for Climate Week in New York City. So we have a lot to say about efforts that we're doing to help transition our food system to a more plant-centric, plant-forward food system than what it is right now.
This whole discussion and the whole subject, not just for this podcast, when I teach this sort of stuff, we talk about personal health. People eat for a whole variety and drink for a whole variety of reasons. One is for energy, right, to keep us going. The other is it's enjoyable. Sort of all comes into play. And then the broader discussion about what's the best, quote unquote, diet for us and the planet. Where there are constraints in terms of costs, and Galina's an economist, we're going to talk about that. But David mentioned sustainable, the word sustainable. And that's an increasingly important part of the discussion. So we could talk about personal health. So that's one of the reasons to eat, in addition to the others, is to keep ourselves healthy, maintain health, or return ourselves to health. But when we talk about that, we talk about the health of the planet. We didn't always do that, but we increasingly do that now. And when I say us, I mean private industry, as well as the government. The U.S. government's about to release new guidelines, and that has increasingly become an important part of what they're talking about, because you cannot be healthy if you're breathing unhealthy air and drinking unhealthy water, let's say. So, Galina, why do we have you here?
Well, as you said, I'm an economist. Over the last 10 years, I became increasingly interested in how do we solve the climate change problem. I do prefer to think about solutions rather than problems because it's better for my mental health. The food system is a very large contributor to greenhouse gas emissions, but not only. It's occupying most of our land. It's consuming most of our water. About 70% of land and water use and greenhouse gas emissions come from animal agriculture. And only 18% of calories consumed globally come from animal products. So animal agriculture is using disproportionate amount of resources to produce food for mostly wealthy consumers, because if you look at the diet of lower income consumers in this country or lower income countries, they consume a lot fewer animal products because those are just much more resource expensive. And so if you want to have a sustainable food system, sustainable from the planetary health point of view, as you mentioned, but also from social justice point of view, we need to reduce reliance on animal products in wealthy countries. There's just no way around it. The population is expected to grow to 10 billion people from 8.
We're over 8 now, right? Yeah.
Exactly. And so it's just the land is finite, right? And the amount of water is finite. And so we just need to be a lot smarter about how we use those resources to make a more just and equitable access to food for everybody.
Yeah, and we had a green revolution back in the 70s or so, maybe even into the 80s. That was a big deal. Nobel Prize for Peace was given out for that. We're smart, but we keep pushing the limits on technology. So yeah, we're over 8 billion. I mean, the growth rate has sort of slowed somewhat, but still, I mean, we're going to approach 10, and technology can only take us so far. Economy has been a big part of food going back to the American Revolution. I mean, the sugar trade, the Boston Tea Party, the spice trades. I mean, food has been a big part of world economics for a long time. What are the forces at play now?
So the global food system is very interesting. So first of all, people have this idea of that we consume local food, but it's actually not true. Some communities in California, where I live, they export 80% of what they produce, and then they import 80% of what they eat. So it's an extremely interconnected global system. And it has this kind of hourglass shape of the supply chain. So there's millions and millions of producers, and there's 8 billion consumers. In the middle, there is only like a handful of large food companies. So think about Tyson in the U.S., Smithfield, which is largest pork producer in the U.S., actually owned by China. JBS is a big Brazilian food company. These are just huge multinationals that have a lot of political power. And as you mentioned, they then lobby for policies that serve their profits rather than the consumer benefit or planetary benefits. And so that include subsidies for their food growers. There are cases where food company would pollute a river, say, and then they would be fined by the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency in the U.S., but then they would get a grant to clean up that pollution. So that provides them with no incentive to behave better in the future. So that kind of structure of the global food system is not conducive to sustainability without some government action and some action on the part of consumers who can vote with their dollars any day.
Yeah, so I mean, they're monopolies. I mean, that's pretty much what's going on. And, you know, we've been through that before, going back to Teddy Roosevelt, antitrust and all this sort of stuff. So, listen, not to demonize everybody. There's a lot of good people at work. Humans are humans, and there's incentives and there's disincentives, right? They're businesses, so there's a lot of disincentives involved. Again, this is the million-dollar question, especially for just a 30-minute podcast. But how do we get around that?
Well, I think the market way to get around it is to provide people with better products that they like. I think at the end of the day, you know, we can talk about consumer choice, but people are going to eat what is familiar to them. And if they're lower income, they're going to eat what they can afford, frankly. And if you're trying to encourage, you know, a more balanced diet that includes less focus on meats and in some cases processed meats and high cholesterol meats for more healthy legumes and vegetables and things like that, those products have to be available. Sadly, those products are not the better products are not the ones that receives the major government subsidies. So when we talk about the government subsidies that go into meat, for example, you're talking about subsidizing the cost of the water that's used to grow the grain, subsidizing the cost of insurance for the grain and the corn. And we grow mostly soy and corn, and that's what's fed to animals. So these kinds of subsidies are hard to unentrench. So you would look and say, well, will the government subsidize good things? Will
I mean, veggies and fruits don't get subsidized, right? Yeah.
And they're not doing research. I mean, USDA has done tons and tons of research into increasing the yields of corn and soy so that can be fed to animals, but not increasing the yields of lentils, you know, or peas or things that are really high nutritious things that could be fed to people. So there's that. And then, of course, one thing our organization Foundation is involved in. It's fsi.org is our website. It's not fair, I think, to say to people, you should eat something different. I mean, you can say that, and if they're able to, and if they're motivated to do it, they can do it. And some people do that. You know, if they have a heart attack and they get a doctor telling them, look, you need to cut down on red meat or something like that, they might make that change. But in the end, the system can do a lot. Like, what is in cafeterias? What is being presented to people? What are their choices on the menu? What are the costs for those choices? So we are involved in what's called alternative proteins. We're looking at other ways to create a meat experience. And there's a number of different technologies involved there. And there are pros and cons to those, but they're all good. They're all things to be tried. We also fund work to train chefs to prepare better, whether it be fully plant-based options, so that people come to understand that a plant-based meal can be actually very, very tasty. Or just if you're going to have meat, maybe a smaller percentage of inclusion of meat. Maybe the burrito has a little bit less beef in it and a little bit more beans.
Yeah.
Those kinds of things are easy. You don't need consumers to really do anything. It's just that what's provided to them.
People have a trepidation, fear, maybe even about not consuming enough meat, especially athletes. It's interesting because I know you made a video at one point about this, and you talked about, 800-pound gorillas are, largely, if not all, vegetarian. And people out there are probably familiar with the Roman gladiators, right? I mean, Russell Crowe and the movie, and they're really tough guys. There's good reason to believe that they were either mostly or largely vegetarian. They consumed barley and other grains and stuff. But I'm going to have you talk about this from personal experience. You had a website at one point called, Fuel for the Fighter?
Yeah, that's not up anymore, but people can check out nutritionfacts.org, which is a fantastic website by Dr. Michael Greger. But I can just tell you my personal experience, and Galina can speak to this as well. First of all, let me just say, you can eat animal products as a balanced part of your diet and be healthy, obviously. But you can also decline to consume as much or any animal products, and also, depending upon your personal physiology, but you could be healthy.
There's very little in this discussion or any recommendations that really should be absolute, and I think that's the trend.
Right.
And certainly I know from you, Alec, there's some people that, hey, this is the way you have to eat. This is the diet that's prescribed. And Galina and I had this discussion recently about, what's the quote-unquote healthy diet, and I'm actually working on a paper just on that. There really is no such thing. People have gotten to be more flexible. You don't have to go all the way. You don't have to eliminate meat completely. Generally speaking, for most people, if you have specific issues with diabetes, hypertension, autoimmune diseases, whatever, there's going to be variation. But generally speaking, for most people, mostly plant-based, eating vegetables, fruits, and eliminating most animal products is going to be the best thing. And Michael Pollan talks about that, right?
There's nothing magic that happens if you become vegan or something like that, as opposed to mostly vegan or plant-based.
There's ethical reasons where you might want to be.
Absolutely.
That's another whole discussion.
But from a health point of view, so just anecdotally, and you know this, we bury the lead a little bit. I am a 10-time world champion in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu.
How many times?
10-time world champion.
Only 10.
Yes.
Oh,
I was one of the first Americans to get a black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and I have been, on a fully plant-based diet for maybe 40 years or something like that. That came as an ethical thing. But my point is, many fighters, many big, strong, tough guys I deal with consume very little or no animal products. And
we're talking about UFC fighters.
Yes, absolutely.
These are not like, just guys in the neighborhood. These are big-time fighters.
Yeah, the point being, you certainly don't have to consume a high amount of animal products to be healthy. And I'll pass it over to Galina, who I say is a triathlete, and I jokingly say I try to be an athlete.
So I'm an endurance athlete, not professional, amateur. I don't hold any world titles, but my goal is to cross the finish line without injuries pretty much for every race. The longest distance I completed was the Ironman distance, which is the total of 140.6 miles.
2.4 mile swim, 112-mile bike, and
a marathon.
And only a 26.2-mile run, yeah.
Right. It took me 15 hours, so I didn't break any records, but it's pretty well known in the endurance athlete community that plant-based diet is really the key to success, because you can actually eat potatoes while you're biking, because you do need to consume something for this kind of distance. If you eat a steak while biking, I don't know, some people can probably do it. Most people cannot, because your body takes so much energy digesting animal products that there's very little energy left for athletic
You
performance.
kind of feel heavy, sort of.
You
right?
feel heavy and you feel sleepy, but if you eat a baked potato with some salt, you feel pretty good kick of the slow release sugar that it gives to you. And to your point, Robert, about there's no ideal diet. Well, seriously, depends on your lifestyle, right? So when the
Right.
low carb diet was kind of a popular thing, yeah, it might be the right thing for a person who spends most of the time in a sedentary behavior, sitting, in front of the desk or on a couch. But if you're trying to train for a long distance race and running, 50, 60 miles a week, you really need carbs. Like, you're not going to survive without carbs.
Yeah, or we should say across the lifespan. I mean, when we teach here at Hofstra, and I teach, the nursing school, nursing PA school, I used to teach at the medical school and at the School of Health Science, wherever it is. I mean, we make the point, we have to look across the lifespan. Pediatrics, young kids is a totally different story. Older age groups, geriatrics, totally different story. And even if you're in the middle of, your life, you're going to sometimes be training for competitive events, sometimes not, right? Sometimes you're more sedentary.
Like, I've been vegan for, 15 years, vegetarian probably for 20 years.
And this is before or after David? AD or BD?
I was already vegetarian when I met David. And then I learned about some ethical stuff in the dairy and egg industry. And so cheese was the hardest to give up. You're talking about meat a lot, but cheese is producing a lot of greenhouse gas emissions because it takes so much milk to make a slice of cheese. People sometimes say, well, for climate reasons, I'm vegetarian, so I'm just going to have a cheese pizza. Well, dairy comes from the same cow,
Yeah, I know firsthand. For a lot of people, pizza is the one thing. Is hey, look, you took my burgers from me, but pizza never, right?
Well, one of the things our organization sponsors is something called the Reducitarian Summit, and it's actually coming up in October in Atlanta. There's an organization around that, a nonprofit we support, and you get the idea by the name. It's Reducitarian, so no one's trying to take anything from anybody, but eat your steak and eat your pizza, but maybe have it on special occasions, or don't eat as many slices of pizza, or put 20% less cheese on the pizza. You can always ask for it. So there's ways to do things that are very easy to do that don't require a lifestyle shift or taking on a new identity or anything like that. One thing, though, I want to say to your audience, which I know does consist of, healthcare professionals and people who are going to make recommendations, the one message I'd like to get to them is when you have patients, or if those patients are examining their diet, just to understand it is possible to be healthy consuming less animal products. Like, there's a lot of disinformation that's out there now, and a lot of information coming from the meat industry and information that's being passed around, the carnivore diet, things like that. I would like professionals who are making recommendations to others to not buy into that and understand you can be healthy consuming some animal products, but you can be absolutely very healthy, and in many cases a lot healthier, by consuming less animal products. And I'd also put in a plug for, plant-based meats. This is something we work with a lot, and there's been a lot of concern that it's been raised by the industry very skillfully around ultra-processed foods and long ingredient lists. Those are legitimate concerns around ultra-processed foods. The research that's been done on the negative effects of ultra-processed foods is around corn syrup, and things like that, and sugar. When you parse out plant-based meats, they are not part of the causality at all in the research that's been done. In fact, they raise as, perfectly healthy, certainly healthier than the things that they're trying to replace. So I wouldn't lump plant-based meats into this concern about ultra-processed foods. And then, of course, if you're talking about a plant-based hot dog, well, what about the process of an actual hot dog and the carcinogens? And the World Health Organization has listed processed meats as a class 1 carcinogen. So plant-based meats are healthier than the things they're trying to replace. It is not, as good as a lentil loaf or something like that. But, you got to look at these things in context, and that's what I'd like to...
Yeah, and again, the context, and we're sort of repeating this, but it's worth repeating. You don't have to be absolute with everything. You don't have to be absolute eating plant-based burgers all the time. You don't have to be absolute on the other side. You can mix it up. It could be a mixed methods approach. We're in the early stages of planning a conference on this specific topic on global nutrition, and we have a lot of expertise at Hofstra right here on campus. Economists, we'll have Galina back as well, and so we'll have people from the business school, obviously from the health schools. And just a shout out to my friend Brett Bennington, who's the chairman of Geology, Environment, Sustainability, and we're working actively now on local community-based stuff. We have community gardens here. We're reaching out to the community, trying to educate them. With our cafeteria, we have an effort going to make sure that students on campus have the right choices, etc. So you mentioned the plant-based proteins, and there are a lot of aspects to changing behavior. One of them is people don't like the way it feels in their mouth. Talk a little bit about some of these aspects that you're working on.
You started off the podcast talking about food, and people consume food for different reasons, for get energy. The main reason people consume what they consume is taste, is it just tastes good. And I have this discussion too when I'm talking to people about consuming less meat or something like that. We might have a discussion about, do you need to eat meat? Do you need this? And when it comes down to it, I say, come on, if a hamburger tasted bad, would you keep eating it? And the answer is, of course, no. At the end of the day, people eat what tastes good, and that's completely reasonable. And meat tastes good. And there's not been a lot of effort in a lot of communities into how to make fully plant-based meals taste good. So it's seen as like a side dish. But if you put that effort in meat, then food tastes great. So people will consume what tastes good. One of the things our organization has launched is something that was originally conceived of by Galina and myself even before we founded Food System Innovations, which was, let's do some taste tests of these plant-based meats. Do they taste good to meat eaters? Because at the end of the day, they're not going to succeed no matter how nutritious they are or what they're replacing. If they don't taste good, they don't taste good. People can check that out at nectar.org. But what we found was there were a few products out there that meat eaters in blind taste tests absolutely did say tastes as good as meat. Impossible Burgers, for example, and things like that. But there's a lot of them that are falling short, and getting that information is very helpful for those companies to understand how can you make these products both taste better, and how can you do it in a way that bolsters their nutritional value and ultimately lowers the cost. So there's no question about it. Taste is king.
So we go out to restaurants to enjoy ourselves with friends, and we have parties, and food is a big part of that. There's a reason that there's a term comfort food. I mean, there's a lot of psychological, emotional aspects. Yeah, just before we end, we're just talking about making stuff taste good. So this, she didn't ask for this, but I'm going to give a shout out to Yvonne Levy in Laurelton at a restaurant called Tomatis, because we were just there the other day, just sort of accidentally, right? We had, my family, you guys included, were looking for a vegan place to eat, and we just stumbled upon this lovely Jamaican restaurant in Laurelton, not that far from Hofstra. She had oxtail, vegan oxtail, and all sorts of other stuff that you wouldn't imagine, and it was great. And all vegan. She's a nutritionist. So a shout out to Yvonne.
One of the things that we really enjoy when we come to New York is the fully plant-based restaurants. New York City, and I'm sure there's things outside of Manhattan as well, but if you really want to see how good can a fully plant-based meal taste, just seek out one of those highly rated restaurants. It's amazing.
Yeah, it's really easy. Just go to Google Maps and type in vegan, and the places will show up. You do have to read a little bit the comments, because sometimes AI pulls a restaurant that the comments say it's not good for vegan people, right. But there will be plenty.
And a shout out to New York, because I know you guys are from the Bay Area, and you said you don't have what we have, so that's shout out to New York. So thank you all out there for listening. This has been another wonderful episode of Nurse to Health, brought to you in collaboration with the Hofstra Northwell School of Nursing and PA Studies on the lovely campus of Hofstra University. As usual, we try and take you behind the scenes and to the front lines. And today we pulled the veil back a little bit on the world of nutrition. And as always, thanks to our wonderful engineer, the best in the business, John Mullen. And all of you stay well and eat well.